I love Abbott and Costello. I grew up watching and listening to everything they put out or everything I get my hands on. And at one point, our TV broke and my mother said, let's not get another TV for a while because you guys watch too much TV anyways. To keep my sanity in check, I would listen to these cassette tapes from these old radio shows that my dad would get. My favorite cassette tapes in that little collection were the Abbott and Costello ones. And I would listen to those tapes over and over and over again. I would reenact the routines with my younger brother who I could slap. So I was Bud Abbott. You know, that was what kept me from losing my mind not having a TV. Is it strange to you that, or does it amaze you really, that in 2024, we're still talking about the work your dad did 70, 80 years ago?
You know, I have to say, in all honesty, my entire family, including the great-grandkids of Dad and the great-greats, I mean, it's not surprising. It's so appreciated, you know. But I think too that, and this is just my thoughts, is that the world is in such it is in such turmoil right now.
Right.
And I think that people want to retrieve comedy from the past that gives them that old-fashioned belly laugh again, and it takes them out of what's going on around them. Certainly takes them away from the news, etc., and allows them to just escape, you know, with laughter. Now, I have to say that even though Abbott and Costello are still out there making people laugh, I never want to omit any of the other great legendary comedians and teams that also helped boost the morale of the public. And that goes for Laurel and Hardy, Three Stooges, Marx Brothers, W.C. Fields, you name it.
Right.
I think it's a testimony to all of them. You know, in the past, I've had people say to me, you know, I love Abbott and Costello. I don't like Laurel and Hardy, or I like Laurel and Hardy. I was never really, you know, keen on Abbott and Costello. And I always come back with, that's okay.
Right.
You know, each team, you know, it talks differently to people. I said, but at the same time, you can appreciate, you know, the comedic works of all of these legendary greats. And I think that's so important. You know, each one brought something so unique, you know, to the forefront. I always say that if you look back at the beginning of the last century, however, you know, during World War I, you had Wheeler and Woolsey, you know, who was boosting the morale. You know, Depression years, you had Laurel and Hardy. World War II, Abbott and Costello. You know, so I think it's a great testimony to all of them, and I'm always so appreciative of the fans, especially the younger generation of fans, you know, whether it's the millennials, the Gen Zs, you know, who are discovering Abbott and Costello. God bless them. Thank you.
It's a great point you bring up, and I'm a fan of a lot of comedic duos, but I don't know that there's another duo out there that has impacted pop culture as much as Abbott and Costello, in my opinion. You look at movies and television shows today, and you can see where the comedy writer, it's not who's on first, but it's a reflection of who's on first or one of their bits from the day. So it's something that they kind of recycled or used or were inspired by. You tell me if this is wrong. I heard that Jerry Seinfeld created Seinfeld based off of the Abbott and Costello TV show. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. In fact, we did the junket press tour with Jerry Seinfeld back in the early 90s when we did Abbott and Costello meet Jerry Seinfeld. And he was explaining before we went into one of the press rooms how, as a kid, you know, he said it wasn't so much their movies, but it was their television show that was running on WPIX that he fell in love with and he gravitated towards. So a lot of his characters, I think, I can't remember the gentleman's name, who's sort of a takeoff of Bud Abbott. Costanzo, is that his name?
Oh, yeah, George,
Costanzo? Yeah. And, you know, it was such an honor to be able to have another great talent, you know, bring that up to us, because both Abbott and Costello, the families were there at the press junket to promote, you know, the TV special. You know, so I think it's absolutely correct. And I have to say he's a wonderful person. He was just wonderful to us. And I think we even beat out Gone with the Wind remake.
Wow.
that night. We beat it out, you know. So we were pretty happy with it and very innovative for its time because they incorporated Jerry Seinfeld right into some of the film. clips of Abbott and Costello.
Yeah, it was very much ahead of its time. Correct. It was. I don't even know how they did it to this day. I watch it and I'm like, how do they have this technology back then?
I know that's what the grabber was. It was like, wow, they're going to put Jerry Seinfeld in scenes with Abbott and Costello, and it worked.
It really did. Now, of course, your dad was this huge star. Did you ever have the desire to follow in his footsteps and do comedy, or what was? No. Did you have a whole different path?
For a while, I was in the entertainment industry, but I have to tell you, I just did not have that burning desire.
Yeah.
There's only one Lou Costello,
Right.
And when you have the name Costello, I found out even when I was singing and I was working with the big bands that the minute Costello got attached to anything in the press, it was all about my dad. It was not about me.
Right.
And somebody had said, have you thought of changing your name? And I said, no, that is my name. Why am I going to change it? I can stand on my own 2 feet. But it was difficult. But I just didn't have that burning desire. And that's what it takes, to make it. The competition is extremely fierce. But I went back to my first love, which was travel. I had flown for United Airlines when we were called stewardesses, back from 68 to 72. And I loved the travel end of it. So when I left the business, per se, I went back and became a travel advisor, and I could not be happier.
That's awesome.
So I actually specialize in cruises. So anybody out there is looking for a cruise, good travel agent, travel advisor, I'm here. And you can feel free to give out my email.
And you also had the time to write a book, Lose on First, which, by the way, I listened to it. I'm a slow reader, so I had to listen to it in time for this interview. Incredible job, by the way, especially on the audio book. I mean, not only do you have to write a book, but now you got to go into a recording studio and record all this stuff. It's got to be super tedious.
Well, when I did the book, that took 4 years because I was absolutely obsessed with grabbing anybody I could that worked with him, knew him, et cetera, boyhood friends, et cetera. And it was it was sort of my gift, back to my dad, because of the movie of the week, Bud and Lou, which was so totally sensationalistic. It was awful. Nobody in that film that was alive was portrayed because everybody feared the lawsuit. But my book, thank God, Lose on First, lasted 22 years in print. Not one bad review, thank God. And people had said, why don't you do an audiobook? This is when the audiobook started, becoming popular. And I thought, oh boy, that's going to take a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money. And so I kept putting it back on the back burner. Well, during COVID, my friend, Pamela Wise, producer, had suggested to me again, revisiting the idea of putting it into an audiobook format. And I thought about it. And she locked onto this wonderful sound engineer up in Northern California, June Miller, who was just brilliant. And it was like together, the three of us were, just knocking around ideas, this and that. How are we going to present it? This and that. I would do the narration. And I had done voiceovers years ago, so I was familiar with that. And so what I did is I literally moved into the walk-in closet, which became Studio C. And we did everything via, electronically through, patching in with the phone from June's facility up in Northern California. And then Universal graciously allowed us to use some clips, audio clips, so that we could give the readers or listeners a little bit more than just the spoken words. Now they were going to actually hear Abbott and Costello's voices. It took about 6 months, to complete. And then we finally got it out. And it's been doing really, really well. They can, locate it on any of the audiobook platforms, including Amazon. And for an extra added bonus, my producer, Pamela Wise, again said, why don't we put this in a 10 CD, collector set? And I thought about it. And I thought, okay, So what we did is she did some research and she locked into a great company out of Tennessee. And it took about another 5 months, but we put out the 10 CD collector set on the audiobook with an 8-page Lou Costello family album, which I signed for people. And if anyone is interested, now you can't buy this on Amazon, okay?
Okay.
You can't buy it over at Walmart. It's not available on the commercial market. But if anybody is interested, they can certainly email me, and I can give them the information, and we invoice right off of PayPal.
Well, I'll be buying one for sure. I know that. I love the book. And, you know, I grew up hearing that Abbott and Costello hated each other. They couldn't stand each other. You know, this whole thing. Now, I think that's kind of a well-known rumor. But after listening to your book, it sounds to me, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong here, there was a deep love there, but it was like a brotherly love. You know, you had an older brother and a younger brother, 2 different lives, but they both looked out for each other. They were both there for each other when it came to it. I think it was more of a brotherly type relationship, but an age gap brotherly relationship, if that makes sense. Is that accurate, you think?
It does. And it does. And, you know, the press and the media, you know, from the beginning of time has been so instrumental in trying to, you know, put information out there that is just not true. It's based on something that happened, but they put their own twist and spin on it so that readers will be more apt to pay for the magazine, the newspaper, whatever.
Sure.
I go back to what Bob Thomas, the writer of the book Bud and Lou, said to my sister Carol, who passed away in 87, when she contacted him, and she was furious. She said, how could you write a book on my dad? How could you be so, how?
Yeah.
It's not true. Why did you do that? And he very calmly said, and I was in the room, you know, when she was talking to him, and he said, unfortunately, Carol, you don't sell a book by being nice. Well, boom. That's what launched the whole thing for me to do my book, Lou's on First.
Yeah.
Because I said, you could do a book by being fair. And, you know, it's that seedy part of the entertainment world that I don't care for. You know, I mean, a perfect example, too, is with Robin Williams, you know, just a brilliant, you know, talent. And when he died, I said to somebody, I said, you watch, give it a week or two, and you're going to see on the newsstands at the market, the tabloids, you know, putting some kind of trashy, you know, copy line to get people to buy the magazine. And sure enough, I was right.
Yep.
And somebody called me and said, you were right, Chris, because I was just in the market. And I said, I was too. And, you know, they couldn't wait to get their digs in.
Mm-hmm.
So I always say to people when it comes up about Abbott and Costello not liking each other, I said, look, do you have brothers? Do you have sisters? Have you ever had a fight? Have you ever had a good friend that you had maybe an argument with and you didn't talk to them for a minute or two? We all have. You know, nobody is exempt from that. And Abbott and Costello first were human beings. Stars second. They had a tremendous love for each other. And God help anybody who said anything derogatory about Bud. My dad was fiercely protective of him, and the same thing with Bud towards my dad. They were very much like brothers. They fought like brothers. They loved like brothers. Bud was very much adopted into our family. My grandfather, Dad's dad, absolutely adored this man and called him his third son. The families today are still very close together. You know, my sister and I have frequent lunches with Betty Abbott, Bud Abbott's niece, who was script supervisor, did films like Breakfast at Tiffany's, etc., and started out on Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein, and also his great niece, Chrissy Abbott. So I always say you got to just do the math, multiply, divide, subtract. Maybe you'll get a little bit of what is the truth. And so I always try and say, look, you know, did they have arguments? Of course they did. Did they not talk to each other at times? Of course they did. But they always got back together. You know, Betty Abbott said to me, Bud's widow, when I interviewed her, she said, you know, your dad and Bud, they would have a difference of opinion or this or that, and they wouldn't speak to each other. But she said, you know, your mom and I always remained very close friends, and I'll tell you why. We never got involved in their arguments.
Yeah.
He said, we realized that it would blow over, and it did. So I just, people just need to kind of look at their own lives and people in their lives. And of course you're going to have an argument, a disagreement. It's human nature.
And
also Bud and Lou were two very different personalities.
Right.
Dad was more gregarious, outgoing. Bud was more laid back.
Yeah. And, in your book, the way you describe Bud's reaction to your father passing away, it brought tears to my eyes because you kind of see that love show through during that time. It was very well done. Thank you for that.
I think it was important to bring that up because so many people, I've seen on Facebook people say, well, Bud never was at the funeral. He wasn't invited. And I'm going, where does this information come from?
Right.
He was a pallbearer, so I just kind of knocked my head against the wall. But that was a very poignant memory for me sitting with Bud when I was just 16. I think I'd just gotten my driver's license. And I went out to visit with them. Back then when you got your driver's license, you'd go anywhere. You need to go to the market. Oh, sure, I'll go.
Right.
But I had the greatest time with him. I mean, he gave me a tour of his whole home and his awards and this, that. And it was towards the end of that afternoon when I was sitting on the couch with him. And I was fascinated because he had this wonderful cane with this gold tip. And he had the cigarette holder with the gold tip. And all of a sudden we're talking and he had the TV on. And all of a sudden we heard the music rev up to the Abbott and Costello TV show, which indicated to me years later that man had that channel on because he watched it every day.
Mm-hmm.
And as we were sitting there, his eyes went to the TV and I can remember kind of doing a side glance to him because I didn't know what to say. And you could just see that little teardrop coming out of the corner of his eye.
Mm.
And in barely audible voice, he just said to the TV, I miss my pal.
Wow.
So.
Wow.
Wow.
You address a lot of rumors in your book, so I encourage everyone to pick it up. But one of the ones that I always heard, and maybe you can talk about it here, is who's on first. I think that was probably their most popular bit. The idea was that they didn't write that it was an old routine that people did, and they were just the ones who made it popular. But that's not true.
No.
Is that correct?
No, that's correct. Betty Abbott, Bud's widow, Bud Abbott. She was also in the industry and for a long time was actually Bud's straight woman when they would do the circuits. And so she was a seasoned pro, Corrine dancer in burlesque vaudeville, straight woman. She had a big track record. At any rate, she was explaining to me, she said, back then there was a skit called Who's the Boss? And there was also another skit which dealt with a baseball theme. And she said all the comics in the teams would perform these. They were like stock routines for burlesque and vaudeville. And she said when your dad and Bud teamed, they took this baseball routine and they redid it. And what they wanted to do is to incorporate their own dialogue where they would put in like the names of the team. God, now I have to go back and look at the routine. I know the right fielder or left fielder didn't have a name, but you know who I'm talking about.
Right.
And all they did is they incorporated their own material so they could make it their own. Okay, so the Who's on First that everybody is so familiar with is basically Abbott and Costello, with additional dialogue by John Grant, their head comedy writer. My dad's cousin Lou Reach, who was a fabulous man and lived well into his 90s, very, very dapper. And he used to tell the story. He said, Chris, did I ever tell you the story about the time your dad asked me to listen to a new routine they were doing? And he was a great storyteller, and he would sit there and he'd say, well, he said, I used to drive your dad into the burlesque houses when he was working with Bud. And I was just a young guy then, and he says, I just wanted to go in and see the Burlicue girls. That's all I wanted. I wanted to see Burlicue girls. And so he said this one night he was driving Dad into the city and Dad turned to him and said, Bud and I are working on this routine. And why don't you come by Mom and Pop's tomorrow? We're going to be rehearsing it. And I want your thoughts. And Lou said, I felt so honored that he'd want my thoughts. He said, who am I? I'm just the cousin. But he said, sure, I would love to. So he said the next afternoon he went over to, my grandparents' house, and they had a basement. And he went down to the basement, and Dad had a chair there for him. And Lou sat in the chair, and Dad said, we just want your thoughts on this. And Lou said, for a minute, I felt very, very important. So he said, I crossed my legs and I crossed my arms and I'm waiting. He said they started to do the baseball routine and they did it. And then at the end, he said, your father looked at me and said, well, what do you think? And he said, I remember cocking my head and looking at him and going, nope, it'll never fly. Don't do it. Don't do it. He said, thank God they didn't listen to me. But no, that's always, and what's also very funny is every writer known to man, God bless them, when they have died, you'll see obits claiming that they were one of the writers on Who's on First. I think I started counting how many writers.
That whole team. They had
yeah, really.
The writers team was as big as a baseball team.
Exactly. But no, the credit has to go to Dad, Bud, and John Grant.
That's awesome. Also in your book, you talk about how your dad used to just take props home. He wanted it, he took it, basically. And my question to you is, do you guys still have a lot of the hats and the suits and stuff that they wore? Is that all like in museums and stuff, or is that just thrift store?
No. Well, first of all, my mom used to say that her home was decorated in early Universal. No. He got fitted for his, wardrobe that he did in films. And there were times when I guess wardrobe would just allow him to take it home or whatever. And his brother Pat, who was the same size as he was and looked very much like him, would also go in and do the fittings if Dad couldn't. As far as the actual physical props, it was kind of, it wasn't like, see, again, the Bud and Lou book had him as this kleptomaniac, this guy that wanted to go on the sets and steal things and cost the studio money. Dad, no, it never happened that way. First of all, the studio was very cheap when it came to Abbott and Costello. And Abbott and Costello continually kept the gates open to that studio for many years through their films. Dad always thought, you know what, we give so much to this studio, 4 films a year we're pushing out. He said, you know what, if I see something nice, why can't I have it?
Sure.
That was his theory. Charlie Barton, who I loved and became a dear friend, director, he said that they were doing a film, and it may have been Frankenstein. And he said, Lou, just do me one favor, please. Wait until the end of the film until you start taking things, because they were doing one film, and Charlie said, I told him, don't touch it. Don't touch it. We're breaking for lunch. Well, Charlie Van Inger, the cameraman, said to me, well, your dad and I both had our eyes on this clock on the mantle. And he said, I saw him take it. And so during lunch break, I went over to his car and I looked in the front seat. Sure enough, there was the clock. So he said, what did I do? I got one of the prop masters to come over, unlock the car door, and I took the clock. So, they all did it back then. It was nothing, they all did it. I mean, but he was known to wipe out an entire soundstage. Right. I think it was Hit the Ice. They put security guards around the soundstage because of Dad possibly going in and taking the stuff. The next morning they walked in and the entire soundstage was clear. It was cleaned out of the patio tables, the umbrellas, everything. And it was out by our pool. So, but what was funny with Dad is how he would negotiate with the studio on this. It was almost like the Who's on First routine. He would get the studio to sign an agreement that after the film, they'd have to return the stuff to him, and keep him flying the Tunnel of Love scene with the big swans that Martha Ray and he are sitting in. Well, that big swan ended up also by the pool. And is in a lot of family photographs, but Dad used to have this thing with Universal. I think it's in the book when the big boys would start getting a little edgy with him and tell him he absolutely, could not have this, or if they were really bucking him. And Dad just used this ploy. He said, this cigar, if it's lit, gosh, it would be a shame if it accidentally fell on the couch. All right, you can have it. You can have it. He was very much for the underdog.
Yeah.
Dad took care of his crew and the co-stars, and so did Bud. Because the Andrews sisters, when they were working in, I think it was Buck Privates, the studio brought out an old army tent for them to change in. And Dad wanted to know, what was this? Well, what's this? And Maxine said, your father refused to shoot one frame of film until the studio brought in proper trailers for us. It was hot, and we were on the back lot. And they did. The studio finally said,
Wow.
Give him what he wants. But he was very much for the underdog. In fact, they initiated, he and Bud, the rap party that we hear about. After every film, both he and Bud would hand out gold or silver money clips to the crew, engraved. Dad, when he had rheumatic fever and had just come back to filming after being laid up for quite a long time, one person I interviewed for my book, I think it was a painter, he said he never forgot the image of Dad climbing up a scaffold or ladder to hand an electrician $100 bill. Thank you. They would have, a cake brought in, that they would have whatever as a thank you to the crew. So they always, always, always took very good care of the crew and their co-stars.
That's incredible. I'm curious to know what your reaction was and how you felt about, after your dad passed away, they came out with a cartoon, a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, Abbott and Costello, and Bud returned to play himself, and a voice actor played your father. What was your initial reaction to that?
To be honest with you, I was so young, I probably never watched the cartoon back then.
So you didn't even know it was on at that point, probably.
Yeah, I mean, boy, I really can't comment on it because I can't remember how old I would have been.
Right.
But I don't think I was into watching Abbott and Costello cartoons. I was probably more into the Beatles, and trying to meet,
Right. Your sisters, nobody, had a ill will towards the cartoon or anything like that. It wasn't in your peripheral,
God,
really.
No.
Okay.
God, no, it keeps them alive.
Yeah.
Oh, no. I interviewed Stan Irwin, actually. He said that at one point there was a benefit that he subbed for Bud, who was sick, and he did Who's on First with Dad, and had great things to say about him. But no, I appreciate and am honored, humbled, by the people that do that. They keep them alive.
Yeah, absolutely. What traits do you think you picked up from your father?
Well, that's a good question. I have not thought about that one. I know one. When I was little, we used to go on coffee clutches to Grandma's because she only lived around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going with him as a kid, just a small kid. And they'd prop me up on 2 telephone books at the breakfast table in the kitchen. And Grandma would always serve coffee in a cup and saucer, no mugs back then. And Dad, I remember, would bring a big box of donuts. And I would watch him dunk the donut into the coffee and put it in his mouth where the coffee would be running down the corners of his mouth. And then whatever Dad did, I had to do.
Right.
I was his shadow. So he would give me a little bit of the donut, and then I would try dunking it, and I loved it. And because of that, they'd give me more milk than coffee. So it was more mocha. But to this day, I cannot have a donut unless I can have a cup of coffee to dunk that donut in.
Wow. I'm going to have to try that now.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I think from both of my parents, I never really thought about it, but I think I've got qualities from both of them, as does my sister, and my sister Carol certainly did. My niece Melinda, my sister Patty's daughter, oh my God, she's got his nose. She's got his heart, for always wanting to help people. She and Kristen, his granddaughter, the same thing. She has this sweet, gentle quality about her, which Dad also had. Very, very thoughtful girl. He would be proud of that. And I love Italian food, and I know he did too.
Well, I can tell you, you got the storytelling gene from him too, because you're really great at telling stories. I could talk to you for hours, but I know you got things to do. Now, you run Abbott and Costello Collectibles.com. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You can also get your book there. That's also where you can get the special edition CD set. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, actually, my book is not up there because the book is out of print.
Okay.
But the 10 CD collector set is up there. And, they can order it directly off the site. Or if there's any problems, on the site, they have any questions, by all means, email me at accollectibles@aol.com. And I can invoice them separately and just need to know if they want it autographed. We only had so many copies made up. So it's best if interested to, it's like a limited edition.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll definitely be ordering one here soon. So, and then you also have a newsletter that you send out. Is that weekly, monthly? How does that work?
Well, we were monthly until January of this year. And now we're going every other month. I've got a great team of contributors. Jeff Salamondo, who is brilliant and does the Memories and Milestones, and Aaron Winterfield, who does Lou Costello's Patterson. Ron Palumbo, author of Abbott and Costello in Hollywood with Bob Furmanek, is our go-to person for fact, to our questions. And we've got the wonderful Joe Savoya, who does a brilliant Abbott and Costello trivia. But what we do with each issue is we focus on a topic. Like in March, upcoming, because we're going every other month now. In March is going to be focused on Abbott and Costello's wartime films, the service films, and how it impacted, the American public and certainly the troops back during World War II. We're also now starting to incorporate a little bit more for the reader and subscribers, which are sound bites.
Oh, nice.
Here and there So they're kind of getting everything in the issue. If there's a new release, we've got it in. If there's something news breaking, we've got it in. We have a Q&A spot. We've got a spotlight section, where we spotlight, subscribers, so that subscribers can share their love for Abbott and Costello with others. And we're worldwide. We've got over 6,000 subscribers to date and growing strong. And I'm very proud of it. We're in about 6 countries, very heavy in the U.S. and Canada.
And you can subscribe by going to the website as well, Abbott and Costello Collectibles.com, correct?
No, it's not part of the collectible site. What they would need to do is to email me, again, at accollectibles@aol.com. And I need their name, city and state, or province and country. And I will go ahead and sign them up, and they'll receive their current issue. They'll receive a back issue and any assorted news items that we've sent e-blasts to our subscribers.
Perfect.
Okay.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time. It was such an honor talking with you.
Well, my pleasure, Michael. Thank you, and keep in touch.